The Ghosts of the Devil's Highway presented by Absolutely Haunted. Way back in the 1980s, my husband was an over-the-road truck driver, and I traveled with him from coast to coast, all across the country. We were young, childless, and life for us then was one big adventure. That being said, one night we got an adventure that neither one of us was equipped or ready for. That night would be the scariest night of our lives. We saw and experienced a lot of unusual things in our many years traveling over the road, and yeah, some of it was pretty crazy on the endless highway. But nothing, and I do mean nothing, was quite like Highway 666. The night we spent traveling old Route 666 was the scariest night I have ever had. The Devil's Highway was what it was called, and it stretched 200 miles through rugged, desert wilderness. I say was, because the name of the highway has been changed. The highway had its fair share of accidents and weirdness, so much so, that people became convinced it was cursed. And so a legend was born. I first heard about the old Route 666 from an old driver in Phoenix, in a truck stop. He had asked me if I wanted to hear a first-hand account of the highway, and I jumped at the chance. He said it took place one night way back in the early 70s. Long before cell phones or cell service was even a thing. He was crossing the vast stretch of nothingness somewhere out there in the middle of nowhere, when his truck played out right around sunset. He said it was the craziest thing. He was just rolling along, everything fine, when suddenly the truck began to sputter and jerk. There was really nowhere to go, as the side of the highway was way too soft to support the weight of the trailer. He said, he just came to a stop right there in the middle of the empty two-lane road. I remember well that as he retold his tale to me, how very haunted his eyes looked. He told me that everything had been going pretty normal for the hassle that was taking place. He had managed to get through on the CB radio to the nearest truck stop, that was miles away, for help with a wrecker. He was told due to a multi-vehicle accident on another highway, he would most likely have to spend the night waiting for them to have time to get there. That did not comfort him, as he assured me that tales of old Route 666 had been around forever. Just like anyone else having to stay there alone overnight, the prospect was not thrilling. But it seems he did not have a choice. He shared that the stress of the day had wiped him out, and admitted to me that right after he had placed the reflective markers ahead of and behind the truck, he sat in the driver's seat doing his paperwork. He said the day and the heat must have caught up with him, as he dozed off while working on his bookwork. He woke to find his pen had made a straight line right off the log book when he fell asleep. There was barely any rays left from the dying sun when he woke, and it hit him just how dark it was about to be with no lights from anywhere. He had to admit though that the stars in this pitch blackness would be extraordinary in their velvet sky. He also remembered, with the temperature quickly dropping, how cold the desert gets at night. He quickly reached over, rolled up the windows, and grabbed the blanket off the bunk to bundle up in. He had no doubt tonight was going to be a miserable and cold night. He settled back and tried to doze back off, quickly succeeding, as he had been pushing it over the last few days. Maybe the universe was forcing him to take a break. The noise is what he said woke him up. In the perfect darkness he was almost blinded by the set of headlights that were shining in his eyes. At first he thought the tow truck had gotten there early, but then realized the lights were too low to the ground for a diesel wrecker. It didn't take him long to realize that this was some sort of souped-up car. The sound of its engine was tremendous, even just idling. The trucker rolled down his window and made a motion for the car to continue on past him, thinking maybe someone thought he needed help. Of course, the thought also crossed his mind that maybe this driver was up to no good. Way out here in the middle of nowhere, no one would see or hear anything. The thought made him nervous, so he reached under his seat, feeling for the ball bat he kept there just for these types of issues. "Move along, buddy," he yelled, showing the bat out his open window to the driver of the car. The driver laid on his horn, and in a whirl of smoke, spun his tires for a few minutes before backing his car up. The car continued to back away until it was nothing but a speck of light on the roadway ahead. What the heck? The old trucker said that he was worried about what this guy was playing at, as he could not for the life of him figure out what the guy was doing. Maybe the car driver was just trying to scare him? He said that the other driver had sat for at least half an hour in the spot where he had taken his car. All of a sudden, he noticed the lights were rocketing toward him in the darkness. The trucker had a look of fear when he turned to me and said, "You're not going to believe me when I tell you this. But I swear it is true." I was bracing for impact, the headlights growing larger and larger the closer they came. In that last moment, I am not ashamed to tell you that I screamed, and I screamed with all the terror inside me. I thought about my wife, and what would she think about how I left this earth. She had always worried about that knock, and when it would come, that would tell her I had died on the road. How would they explain I was hit head-on by someone while broken down and sitting still? I could hear the engine of the car advancing on my position. I was blinded by the headlights, shielding my eyes with my arm and waiting, but the crash never came. I expected the impact at any second, then realized that the light was no longer shining in my eyes. I pulled my forearm down and peeked over my sleeve. Nothing but vast darkness and quiet. It was so incredibly quiet. I looked in my mirror. Nothing. Out through the windshield, still nothing. Where did he go? I glanced at my watch. It would be morning soon. Relief flooded me. I didn't have any idea what just happened, but I was hopeful it was over. I reached down and picked my logbook up off the floor. When I righted myself, my heart sank. Ahead of me in the distance were headlights again, and they were quickly working their way in this direction. Fear rising, the lights again grew closer and closer down the empty stretch of highway coming towards me. The lights once again blinded me as the sound of an engine came rolling to a stop in front of me. My heart was beating 1,000 miles an hour. I was afraid this would be the moment of confrontation. I tightened my hand on the bat when I heard it. That glorious sound, that no car has ever made. The sound of the air brakes being engaged. Thank goodness, the wrecker was finally here. Hey! The mechanic yelled up to me from the road. You the guy that called out on the radio last night for a tow? He was looking at me questioningly. I sure am. I gushed back. I am glad you're here. The guy let out a laugh. I bet you are. I don't think I would want to be stuck out here. Especially right here. I looked at him questioningly. Right here? I looked around me at the desert under the early morning sunlight. Oh yeah, I had to clean up a really bad accident right here a couple of years ago. Bunch of young teens. Drinking and acting crazy like kids do. Came out here to play chicken with their cars. They knew no cops would be out here in the middle of the night. He continued, let me tell you. Both of those cars were extremely modified and fast, and when they hit head-on, it tore the two vehicles apart. Took him days to find all the parts of the people too. You know, the animals carry him off and stuff. He said that like it was nothing. I now knew what my unfortunate stopping at this particular place had meant me for last night and why I had witnessed what I had. I was glad to get out of there, the old truck driver finished. I don't go that way now if I can help it. He looked at me with concern and added, I wouldn't go there if you and your husband could help it either. So, needless to say, I was less than pleased when my husband informed me that we would be crossing this lonesome stretch of blacktop at night. Our load had to be delivered to Colorado the next day, and this was unfortunately the quickest route. I was more than apprehensive when we pulled out and turned onto the dreaded stretch of roadway. When I say there was nothing out there, I am not kidding. Eventually, traveling on the road for perhaps a good 40 miles, we saw something. Up ahead there appeared to be a speck of something on the road. As we got closer we realized that on the right, lying on the side of the road, was a man. The headlights clearly illuminated his body, and my husband asked me if I was seeing that guy too. He appeared to be passed out or something. I thought perhaps he was hurt. His body was laying there about 20 feet in front of us. We were debating if we should stop and see if he needed help, but before we could decide what to do, the man just suddenly wasn't there anymore. 1 minute I could make out the pattern on his blue shirt, the next he just vanished right before our eyes. Needless to say, my husband stepped on it and we got out of there. We had gone about 25 miles further and talked about what had just happened the whole way. When our headlights picked up a guy walking toward us on the other side of the highway, he was wearing the same clothes as the first man. His head was lowered, as if he was carefully watching his feet walk the lonely blacktop. As our truck got closer, he slowly raised his head, and to our shock his eyes were glowing bright red like fire. We passed him in seconds, but both of us agreed that we saw red eyes. Agreeing we both had just seen a ghost or something unnatural laying upon the roadside that had disappeared. Impossibly, 25 miles down the road we had just passed the same guy in the same clothes, walking in the other direction. But this time we saw he had red eyes, so he was definitely not human. I was freaked out. Roger. I want off this stupid highway, I shouted. Yeah. I do too. He returned. I have never been that scared in my life until what happened next. My husband called out my name. "Look," he said. "Are you seeing what I'm seeing?" I swear that the same guy, same hair, same clothes was now quickly walking up the road again, but this time he had his back to us. He was now some 50 miles from where we first saw him lying on the roadside. I was ready to cry, my heart was banging around behind my rib cage so hard, I was afraid it would burst through my chest. I have never in my life been more afraid as in that moment. It all felt so unnatural and very evil. I could not understand why we kept seeing this man. My husband put his foot down on the accelerator and we hurried on into the night. Luckily for us, we did not see him again. But the next thing that did happen was on the last leg of the highway, early in the morning, a couple hours before sunup. I was just as horrified as what happened next as I had been about the reappearing man. We had reached an area that on the driver's side, across the other lane of oncoming traffic, was an elevated part in the landscape. The passenger side I was sitting on went a few feet off the shoulder of the road, then fell into quite a steep drop-off. Our headlights picked up a bunch of pigs rushing down the hill on the driver's side. They crossed the oncoming lane and then ran across the road in front of our truck at breakneck speed. Their squeals were deafening, their hoofs sounded thunderous. In horror, we watched as they one by one launched themselves off the drop-off on the passenger side of the road and disappeared. Like I've said, it felt evil. My husband and I fully sat there with our mouths open watching this happen, unable to speak. When the moment passed, he looked at me and asked if I could see any of them anymore. I looked and assured him that they had vanished down the long drop the moment they had jumped. Why would they jump? He started. I looked at him with warning in my eyes. I don't know. I was scared and all I wanted him to do was get us out of there. We drove so fast after that, we could have been flying. Both of us had enough of Route 666. When we finally got off the Devil's Highway, I told my husband that I would never, under any circumstances, travel that road again. And I never have. Just remember, if you ever find yourselves on US Route 491, know you're on old Route 666. It was renamed in 2003 because of the connotation to the Book of Revelation and to the devil. The high fatality rate did not help matters either. Was it cursed? Maybe, maybe not. But if you wind up on US Route 491, keep your eyes peeled and say a prayer, just in case.